I would like to show you a beautiful game played by Vladimir Simagin, a player with a highly original, unique and imaginative style of play. In this game, Simagin gives a masterclass in a creative and energetic attack. First, he grabs the initiative, then intuitively sacrifices a piece to start a very strong attack, and eventually sacrifices the exchange to deliver the final blow. White started with d4, and Simagin played the King's Indian defense, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, short castle, knight f3 and d6. Now the main line for white would be bishop e2, but white opted for h3, which is perfectly playable. The idea is to take under control the g4 square in order to prevent the black pieces from invading this square, and also by playing h3, which is very important, white prepares the possible g4, taking under control the f5 square in order to prevent black's main counter chance in the King's Indian, namely f5. Simagin plays e5 and white crosses the center of the board, closing the center and grabbing space in the center and on the queen side. And now the most natural way to continue the development for black would be to develop the queen's knight, either by playing knight a6 or knight d7, or a5 first. But Simagin opted for the sharper variation. He played knight h5, which is a standard move in the King's Indian. The idea is to unblock the f-pawn and prepare the f5. And also, now that the knight is on h5, the g4 advance wouldn't make sense, because after g4, the f4 square would be weakened and the knight would immediately invade and would be greatly placed on this square. And in case white captures, after e takes f, black would get the advantage of two bishops, the dark squared bishop would turn into a monster, and black would get a great blockading square on e5. That's why after knight h5, white simply develops his bishop. And of course Simagin plays f5. It might look that f5 is a little bit premature, because after e takes f, g takes f, which took place in our game, the knight on h5 is loose, as the pawn disappeared from g6 and it doesn't defend the knight anymore. And it might look that white can win a pawn by capturing on e5, opening his queen's diagonal, and in case black captures the knight, white will capture the knight and win a pawn. But it doesn't work, because instead of capturing the knight, black would play queen e8, defending his knight, and the white knight is under attack. It would be forced to retreat, after which black would play f4, attacking the bishop, and it turns out that the bishop would be pinned. And the best thing white could do in this variation would be bishop e2, attacking the knight for the second time, but it doesn't help, because after f takes e, bishop takes h5 and e takes f, double check. Now white king is losing the right to castle, and black has a big advantage. That's why after g takes f, of course white didn't capture on e5, instead white played bishop e2. And now knight takes e5 is a real threat, because queen e8 doesn't work after this, because white will simply capture the knight. That's why Simagin retreats to f6. Queen c2 followed, and now it's time to develop the queen's knight. Knight a6. The knight might jump either to c5 or to b4 with tempo, attacking the queen. White played g3. The idea is to make the f4 advance problematic, because in this case white would capture on f4, and after that the g file would open, and that might be very dangerous for the black king. Simagin plays knight b4, crossing the center of the board with tempo, attacking the queen. Queen b3, now the knight is under attack, that's why a5, defending the knight. And the white king isn't safe, neither in the center, nor would it be safe on the king side. If white castles king side, then black would play f4, demolishing the pawn structure on the king side, opening the light squared bishop's diagonal, after which h3 would be under attack, and that would be very dangerous. That's why white decided to castle queen side. And although white took measures against f4 by playing g3, Simagin still made this sharp move, f4. So Simagin isn't afraid of the opening of the g-file. After g takes f, the black king can fall under attack, but the white king isn't safe either on the king side. The main idea, one of the main ideas of f4 was to vacate the f5 square for the bishop. But in case black captures on f4 first, which looks natural, after bishop d2, black can play bishop f5, which at first sight looks very dangerous because the bishop coordinates with the knight very well, and black is threatening to invade c2 with the bishop, which would be the double attack, attacking the rook and the queen. White has a simple move, knight d4, attacking the bishop and defending the c2 square. So, after g takes f, instead of making the natural move e takes f, Simagin made a much more energetic move, bishop f5 immediately, creating the threat of bishop c2 with the double attack, and the pawn is still on e5, so white cannot play knight d4. So here white made a serious mistake. Simagin writes in his annotations that although white is threatening bishop c2, black is threatening bishop c2, white had to ignore this threat and sacrifice the exchange by capturing on e5. And after bishop c2, queen a3, bishop takes d1, rook takes d1, black is up the exchange, but white has a very good compensation for the exchange. And actually white's position would be better in this case. But white didn't feel like sacrificing the exchange. That's why white played knight e1 in order to guard the c2 square. But this move is very passive. The knight is passively placed on e1, and from now on, Simagin with every move will increase his initiative and create serious threats to the white king. So now that the knight moved away from f3 and cannot jump to d4 anymore, Simagin captures on f4. And after this, after the pawn disappeared from e5, the dark squared bishop has become very strong. Now, not only the light squared bishop, but the dark squared bishop too is directed towards the queen side. And the knight also takes part in the attack. So these three pieces create very dangerous threats to the white king. That's why white played bishop d4 in order to oppose black's dangerous dark squared bishop. Simagin plays king h8, the prophylactic move, in order to move away from the g-file. And the knight on b4 is annoying. That's why white plays a3 in order to kick the knight out. And in case the knight retreated, black's initiative and attack would have faded away. And that's why Simagin found a much stronger continuation. He didn't touch the knight, instead he played c5, attacking the white bishop in his turn. And this move is actually a piece sacrifice. In case white captures the knight, that would be a mistake. That's obvious because black would simply capture the bishop, and without any sacrifices, black would get a strong attack. The knight would be under attack. White must either move the knight or capture on d4, and black after that would be able to capture on b4, and the rook, without making a single move, would turn into a very strong, very active piece, and together with the bishops, it will create very dangerous threats to the white king. What else can white do after c5? White can capture en passant, and this probably was white's best option. Simagin writes in his annotations that in this case, after knight takes c6, black would get a better position for free. And it's true. Now materially the sides are equal, the knight is attacking the very important bishop, the c-file is open, so black's position would be better for free, but still it would be better for white to opt for this variation. Instead, white decided to accept the piece sacrifice. Bishop takes f6 followed, the queen is under attack, black must capture, and now white captures the knight, and white is up a piece. But now we can see Simagin's idea. A takes b, and now black has a great light squared bishop, a very strong queen and bishop battery, the rook's file is open, so all these pieces create deadly threats to the white king. Besides that, the pawn on b4 also takes part in the attack. It's very strong, it controls very important squares, and it forces the c3 knight to move away. After which, the queen and bishop battery would become even stronger, because they will attack the b2 pawn directly. So where should this knight retreat? If it moves to a4 in order to keep the a file closed, that is losing on the spot after the simple tactics. Rook takes a4 and the queen cannot capture because of checkmate. The knight can also move to a2 in order to keep the a file closed. In this case, Simagin was going to play rook a7. So with the idea of doubling on the a file, and it isn't clear how white was going to defend the knight and generally the whole position after this. That's why white made the best move, knight b5. And now the rook invades. The only move is king d2, and now white is still up a piece. The black rook is under attack, and in case black exchanges on d1, the initiative and the attack would fade away. So what to do? How to create new threats? You can pause the video and try to find Simagin's brilliant move. So Simagin leaves his rook under attack, he doesn't touch it, and instead he plays f3. The idea is to open the diagonal for the dark squared bishop, and after black plays bishop h6 check, it turns out that the white king wouldn't have a single move. It cannot move to c1 because of the black rook, neither can it move to c2 or d3 as these squares are controlled by the light squared bishop, neither can it move to c3 because of the pawn and the battery, of course. So, what to do now? The deadly bishop h6 check is coming. Simagin analyzes very beautiful, he gives very beautiful variations in his annotations. So let's take a look at all of them. The first move that comes into mind is, of course, accepting the rook sacrifice and also vacating the d1 square for the king. But it doesn't help. After bishop h6 check, king d1, f takes e check, king takes e2, bishop g6 after the pawn captured on e2 and disappeared from f3, the f file is open and black creates deadly threats on f2. White can play f3, for example, as the knight defends this pawn, but it doesn't help. Now, both the rook, first the rook, and then the queen will move to the e file and create new deadly threats. Queen e2 check, and after the king moves, bishop e3 check would finish the game. That's why white would be forced to play queen d1 in this case to take under control the e2 square, but it doesn't help because of queen g3, again creating an immediate threat. Rook takes e1 check, and after queen takes e1, the queen wouldn't control the d3 square anymore, and after that rook bishop d3, of course, check would be deadly. And in this case, white would be forced to play knight g2 in order to prevent the sacrifice on e1, but now the rook would return to f8 and f3 would fall. The only way to protect it would be the return of the knight to e1, but bishop e3, creating checkmating threats, queen e2, the only way to defend, and the beautiful finish, bishop d3. Pinning the queen, and the only way to save the queen would be to capture the bishop. But if the queen captures, then of course checkmate on f2 would follow, and if the knight captures, then the knight wouldn't defend f3 anymore, and the catastrophe on f3 will finish the game. So that means after f3, white cannot capture the rook. What else can white do? White can capture the pawn. Let's first look at bishop takes f3. In this case, Simagin prepared rook e8, cutting the king on the e file, so that after bishop h6 check, the king cannot escape via e2 square. And again, bishop h6 is deadly, it's coming, and the king wouldn't have any square to move. That's why white is forced to capture the rook in order to vacate the square for his king, but again it doesn't help. Bishop h6, king d1, and now the battery, which was so strong on this diagonal, becomes even stronger on another diagonal, creating checkmating threats on d2. And there is nothing white can do, because the only piece which can protect d2 is the queen, but it cannot move to any of the squares from which it can protect d2, because all the squares are controlled by black. What else? Let's now look at knight takes f3. In this case, bishop h6 check, king e1, and Simagin gives a very beautiful, quiet move, bishop c1. This is the interference tactics. The bishop stands between the white rook and the black rook, and that means white cannot exchange the rooks anymore. The black rook will survive, and next move it will move to b1, after which the pawn on b2 would fall, and the rook from b2 would be very strong, attacking the queen, attacking e2. Besides that, black is threatening bishop e4, attacking the knight, which would be pinned, the f-file would open, and of course white wouldn't survive. And the last move analyzed by Simagin in his annotations is bishop d3, in order to close the bishop's diagonal and hide on c2. But in this case, bishop h6 check would follow, king c2, and rook takes d1, the king must capture, and again queen g5, creating checkmating threats. The only move is queen c2, but now the second rook moves to a8, and the deadly rook a1 check is coming, and there is nothing white can do. So that's why, as neither of these variations work, white decided to play knight c2, in order hoping to jump on e3 in case black plays bishop h6 check. That's why Simagin immediately exchanges this knight. Bishop takes c2. Now, if the queen captures, then simply f takes e, attacking the rook, forcing white to accept the sacrifice, but then bishop h6 check again, king takes e2, and queen f3 check, also attacking the rook. The king is forced to move to the first rank, after which the first rook falls, and then the second rook falls. That's why white captured on c2 with the king. But now, again, Simagin captured the bishop, again forcing white to accept the sacrifice, and white is currently up a rook, but white pieces cannot take part in the defense of the king, and black pieces are extremely active and create deadly threats, so the king is doomed. First, Simagin plays queen g6 check. Now, if queen d3, then simply very beautiful. Black can actually promote to the queen, but Simagin gives even aesthetically more beautiful variation, the promotion to the knight with the fork, and white is forced to capture, and after rook takes e1, of course, now that the pawn disappeared from e2, and now black can capture with check, and after the king moves, of course, the queen will fall. And neither can white play rook e2 because of simple rook capture, and the queen cannot capture as it's pinned. That's why after queen g6 check, instead of queen d3, white played king d2. But now, finally, the cherished move, bishop h6 check. It turns out that king e1 is losing on the spot after queen g2 with two deadly threats, and there is nothing white can do. In case king takes e2, then queen e4 check, again attacking the rook. The king is forced to move to the first rank, after which first rook and then the second rook fall. That's why white opted for the relatively best, queen e3, but now of course the queen is pinned and it will fall. Simagin, however, didn't hurry. The queen is doomed anyways, that's why he made a stronger move. First he captured the pawn, and after rook e1 he captured the queen. Now black has even material advantage, and his attack continues. Queen g3 check, king d2, queen f4 check, and it turns out that the c4 pawn will fall, after which the white king will be checkmated. That's why white resigned. And now I recommend watching Leonid Stein's attacking masterpiece, in which he sacrificed a pawn, a piece, and a queen in the king's Indian defense. But first, like this video and subscribe, as it's really helpful for the channel growth.